A very pleasant day to everyone. I am Maria Sherry Awit, and our discussion today is about music in the temple. Now, the basic instrumental ensemble used in the temple music was harps, psalteries, and cymbals like kinnor, navel, and metziltan. Now, the music was festive, and the sound of some of the instruments played was very loud. Now, sources in the Talmud refer to the great sounds in the temple that were heard from Jerusalem to Jericho. The musicians sought to have an instrumental balance much like an orchestral director would want today. As with the modern orchestra, this was achieved by restricting the number of each instrument in the ensemble. Sources in the Mishnah, also the collection of mostly Halakhic Jewish traditions compiled about 200 AD and made the basic part of the Talmud state that in the temple there should be between 2 to 6 psalteries, 2 to 12 flutes, and no less than 2 trumpets and 9 harps, but only one cymbal. Temple musicians had their ways of contrasting music. One was using voices of different qualities and registers, another was using an antiphony, a question and answer form of singing. Likely this was taken over from secular usage in line with the tendency for secular practice to be incorporated into religion. Now, what did temple music sound like? It is impossible to say with certainty.
Good day, everyone. I am Eliza Canubas, and this is the continuation of the report. There is an evidence that the scale used by the ancient Israelites would correspond to our modern diatonic scale made up of seven pitches, rather than pentatonic scale prominent today in the Middle East. Part of this evidence comes from the research into the ancient Ugarati tablets that were discussed earlier and the work of Suzanne Hawk Ventura. Our ears probably would not find this music sounding too strange, but these ancient scales were not tuned like present day scales. There was no universal tuning in the ancient world. Some notes might sound slightly out of tune because of this. This is true with ancient instruments also. Two kinnors playing together might sound slightly out of tune. A slightly variance of distance between finger holes of wind instruments could make a scale sound slightly out of tune, as well as an ensemble sound a little out of tune. The composition of music in biblical times was based on the principle of cantillation and improvisation. The cantillation is the musical reading of the books, of the five books of Moses, the prophets, book of Psalms, books of Ruth, and etc. A composition was made of short melodic formulas that were combined through improvisation and according to strict and complex artistic rules. We find an indicator of this procedure in several songs in the scripture that appear clearly to be put together from several earlier passages. And that would be all for my part.
Hello everyone, hello sir. I am Hannah Jean Flores, and this is the continuation report of Miss Maria Sherry Awit about the music in the temple. For example, in David's prayer of dedication as the ark was set inside the tent at Jerusalem, 1 Chronicles 16 verse 8 to 36, we find a composite of Psalm 105 verses 1 to 15, Psalm 96 verses 2 to 13, and Psalm 106 verses 1, 47, and 48. This way of composing would require years of apprenticeship and training. The music was then transmitted by the worship leader to the congregation, the singers, and instrumentalists by rote using hand signals or chironomy to indicate the contour of the melody. This became especially formalized in the cantillation of the Torah, which was chanted in regular intervals every Monday and Thursday, the market days in Jerusalem, and on the Sabbath, as well as on the holidays. Following the tragic destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, the entire musical legacy of the temple both vocal and instrumental, seem to be forever lost. However, these hand signs were eventually systematized and transcribed by Aaron ben Asher and Tiberius in the 9th century. During the 10th century AD, at about the same time Western notation was starting to appear, this method of oral transmission was progressively replaced by written accent signs added above the Hebrew text by the Masoretes. These men were scribes and Bible scholars working between the 7th and 11th centuries AD, based primarily in Israel in the cities of Tiberias and Jerusalem as well as in Babylonia. The Masoretic text is still the oldest complete copy of the Hebrew Bible that we have, part of the reading tradition, and the Masoretes preserved was a series of accents. Masoretes did not realize the meaning or the significance of these accents, and for centuries there have been countless theories as to what their original meaning was.
To continue, we've discussed various theories regarding the role of accents in ancient texts. However, instead of focusing on grammar, French musicologist Suzanne Haque Ventura took a different approach as she explored their musical meaning. So, while reading the Hebrew Bible, she noticed unique marks and discovered that their original musical significance had been lost over time. So, this curiosity led her to extensive research and experiments, and eventually she found that these symbols actually represented musical tones, such as notes and ornamentations that forms a melodic structure. So, interestingly, these accents were linked to chironomy. It is an ancient system of hand gestures used in Egyptian music to indicate pitch and melody. Supporting evidence from Ugarit tablets and Sam hand signs suggest that early forms of harmony might have existed, not like the harmonies that we know today, but with simultaneous notes played together. Even archaeological findings of harpists depict musicians using both hands on different strings, reinforcing this idea. And that concludes for the music and tempo.
The Book of Psalms, songs of worship, prayers of the heart, and poetic expressions of faith. Used in temple worship, these sacred hymns have echoed through generations, lifting the voices of Israel in praise and supplication. But did you know that the Psalms were not just a single book, but a collection of writings compiled over time?
The Book of Psalm comes to a Greek psalmos, which originally referred to playing stringed instrument. Over time, it also came to mean the song played along with it. In Hebrew tradition, these songs were central to temple worship, guiding the faithful in prayer, meditation, and praise.
The Book of Psalms is actually divided into 5 smaller books, each ending with a doxology or a short hymn of praise to God. The Book 1, from Psalms chapters 1 to 41, mostly written by David except for 4. The Book 2, Psalms chapters 42 to 72, 18 Psalms attributed to David. Book 3, Psalms chapters 73 to 89, contains only 1 Psalm by David. In the Book 4, Psalms chapters 90 to 106, includes 2 Psalms written by David. And lastly, the Book 5, Psalms chapters 107 to 150, features 15 Psalms by David, with Psalm chapter 150 serving as a grand doxology for the entire collection. Apart from these 5 books, certain Psalms were grouped for specific worship occasions. The Hallel Psalms, Psalms chapters 113 to 118, were sung during Passover and other festivals, while the Songs of Ascent, Psalms chapters 120 to 134, were sung by pilgrims as they journeyed up to the Temple of Jerusalem.
The Book of Psalms was compiled many centuries, with some texts dating back to King David, while others were added later by worship leaders such as Asaph and the sons of Korah. Some materials were included while others were omitted, shaping the final Saturn we know today. From the ancient temple to modern churches, the psalm continued to inspire faith and devotion. Whether sung, prayed, or meditated upon, they remain a timeless connection between believers and God.
So, the songs of the temple live on, resonating through history and into our hearts today.
Hello, good day everyone. I am Nocheme Absalon, your discussant in this topic. Today we'll delve into the fascinating and often surprising world of psalm authorship, moving beyond the common misconception that King David wrote them all. Without further ado, let's get started. The Book of Psalm, a central component of the Hebrew Bible and Christian Old Testament, contains 150 poems and diverse styles and themes, primarily expressing lament and thanksgiving to God. A common misconception is that King David authored all of the psalm. However, a closer examination reveals a more complex and multifaceted authorship involving multiple individuals and possibly even schools or guilds of composers. Now let's talk about David's role. While David is traditionally associated with many psalms, it's crucial to acknowledge that this attribution isn't universally accepted. Some psalm attributed to David may have been written by others, possibly later ascribed to him due to his significant influence on Israelite religious life. David's contribution wasn't solely about authorship, he played a crucial role in establishing Psalmody as a central element of Israelite worship. He essentially developed and formalized the practice of psalm singing, making it an integral part of the temple's music tradition. Now let's move on to the influence of other cultures. The Israelites' exposure to Babylonian and Egypt hymns and psalms during their periods of exile and interaction likely influenced the development of their own psalmody. While pinpointing the exact level of influence is difficult, it's plausible that certain musical forms and lyrical styles were adopted and adapted within the Israelite context. We have here the other psalmist. Beyond David, the book of Psalm credits other individuals and groups as authors. The most prominent examples include the sons of Korah. This Levitical family is associated with Psalm chapter 42, 44 to 49, 84, 87, and 88. The term sons might refer to biological descendants or more broadly to a school or guild of musicians associated with the Korah lineage. Then we have Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun. These were prominent Levite musicians appointed by David to lead the temple music. Their sons also contributed significantly to Psalter. The term sons in this context could refer to a musical guild or school of prophets. Now let us know the role of temple musician. The Book of Chronicles provide extensive details about the Levite musicians who served in the temple. These musicians were not merely performers, they were also composers and prophets using music to convey God's message. Their psalms were considered divinely inspired and integrated into the official liturgical practices of the temple. Lastly, we have determining authorship. Identifying the authors of the earliest psalm is practically impossible. The form of Hebrew poetry that characterizes the Psalms goes back to the early days of Israelite culture. Many Psalm explicit authorship attributions, leaving their origins shrouded in mystery. The existing titles, even those attributing Psalms to David, should be treated with a degree of caution. To wrap up, the authorship of the psalm is far more complex than attributing them to all King David. While David undoubtedly played a crucial role in establishing psalmody within Israelite worship, a diverse range of individuals and groups contributed to Psalter. These included other prominent figures like Asaph, Herman, and Jeduthun, as well as the sons of Korah, and many anonymous composers. Understanding the multifaceted authorship of the psalm enriches our appreciation of their diverse styles, themes, and spiritual significance. The Psalms represent a collective expression of faith, spanning generation and reflecting the evolving religious life of the Israelites. And that would be all for my discussion.
We are now to the topic of Psalm titles. The Book of Psalms contains titles that provide guidance on how they should be performed, including which instruments to use for certain tunes. However, scholars have different interpretations of the meaning behind these Hebrew titles. It is unclear who originally wrote them, but it is believed that the compiler of the Psalter included these titles from its earliest stages to serve as instructions for singing and playing. Some psalms are signed with the title "the chief musician", who could be either Asaph or David. Many psalm titles remain challenging to translate, with some words having uncertain meanings. A great example of it would be Selah, which appears frequently in the Psalms. Yet, nearly every biblical commentary offers a different interpretations of what it means.
Since the Psalms are songs set to music, many scholars concluded that it was not a song word, but referred to directions for accompanying musicians. However, Suzanne Hike Ventura, in her book The Music of the Bible Revealed, offered a different view. She stated that Sila was not an instruction for musicians. She concluded that Sila is part of the lyrics. No formal definition is given for Sila, but she believed that it was like Amen at the close of prayer. Sila stressed the importance or reality of what was said.
A pleasant day, everyone. I am Laura May Blasi, and today I'd like to share with you all a fascinating topic entitled The Temple Musician. These musicians played a vital role in worship and spiritual practices in ancient temples. According to 1 Chronicles 16:37, David chose Asaph and the Levites to be in charge of the daily worship. This selection was not random, it was based on their musical skills and leadership abilities. Chinenaya, on the other hand, was appointed as the music director due to his exceptional musical skills, as mentioned in 1 Chronicles 15, verse 22. In 2 Chronicles 25, we learn that 24 men were appointed to lead worship. Verse 7 states that all these 24 men were experts and their fellow Levites were trained musicians, and they were 288 men in all. The leaders were under the authority, taking orders directly from the king. Heman's sons, for example, were under his direction and played cymbals, harps, and other string instruments during times of worship at the temple. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman took their orders directly from the king, as seen in 1 Chronicles 25 verse 6. In conclusion, temple musicians were chosen, trained, and under authority. They played a crucial role in worship and spiritual practices, and their legacy continues to inspire us today.
Now let's proceed to the order of temple worship. We are not certain what order of worship was observed in the time of Solomon Williamson. Thinks the word of Isaiah 6 verse 3, Holy, 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 the Lord Almighty is holy. His glory fills the world, could have been based upon some aspect of the regular liturgy of the temple in Isaiah's day. We do know that temple worship in the time of Jesus was conducted daily and the temple was always open. The actual daily service was varied according to different seasons and days. The people sang from the psalms accompanied by lyre and harp. Not less than 2 or more than 6 harps were to be used and not less than 9 lyres, but there was no limit to the number of lyres. 2 large silver trumpets were used, chiefly for announcing portions of the service.
Good day, everyone. I am Shani Enoch, and this is the continuation of the report of Mr. Himatiza. Before we delve into our topic, have you ever experienced a moment when the sound or a certain action immediately caught your attention and signaled that something important was about to begin? Or maybe it was the ringing of bell, the blowing of whistle, or even a specific announcement that told you it was time to gather. Throughout history, people have used different ways to call others together and mark significant events. In some cases, loud and distinct sounds played a key role in getting everyone's attention, while in others, meaningful rituals were performed to express dedication and obedience. Now, think about how this might connect to the way people have worshipped God in the past. What kind of signals or action do you think were used to prepare for worship? Well, in the ancient Hebrew temple, worship involves various instruments and rituals. One important instrument was a pair of large brass cymbals. These cymbals were likely used to announce the beginning of the service. They made loud sounds that signals worshippers to gather and participate. And sacrifices were also an essential part of worship. This included burnt offerings, fellowship offerings, sin offerings, and trespass offerings. These rituals were acts of devotions and obedience to Yahweh, following the rules given to Hebrews. To elaborate, the use of musical instruments in temple worship was not just for music, but also for communication. The cymbals, for example, were mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 as sounding brass and tinkling cymbals, symbolizing their role in worship. The sacrifices had deep spiritual meanings. There were ways for the Hebrews to express their faith, repentance, and dedication to God. As mentioned in Hebrews 10, these practices originated from the Sinai event and pointed to the future sacrifice of Jesus. By using both music and rituals, temple worship connected the people with their faith and strengthened their relationship with Yahweh. That's all, everyone, and thank you for listening.
Hello, good day everyone. My name is Rielyn Joyce Velasco and I will be presenting the Shema. The Shema is one of the most important prayers in Judaism, derived from Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4 to 9, with additional passages from Deuteronomy chapter 11 verse 13 to 21 and Numbers chapter 15 verse 37 to 41. It is a declaration of faith in one true God and serves as essential component of Jewish daily prayers. The Shema begins with the words, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," from the Bible verse Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4. This verse emphasizes the monotheistic belief that there is only one God. The following verses instruct believers to love God with all their heart, soul, and strength, and to keep His commandments always in their hearts, teaching them to future generations. Proceed to its religious significance. It is being recited daily by devoted Jews in morning and evening prayers. A fundamental expression of Jewish identity and faith. It is often the last words spoken by Jewish individuals at death. It is placed in mezuzahs on doorposts as reminder of God's commandments. In conclusion, the Shema is more than just a prayer. It is a powerful affirmation of faith, commitment, and devotion to God. It continues to be a vital part of Jewish religious life and tradition, influencing believers' spiritual and ethical lives. And that would be all. Thank you.
Singing was not an option for temple worship, but throughout the Psalms, we find calls for worshippers to sing joyfully to the Lord. In Psalms 31 verse 1, we hear a call to sing joyfully to the Lord, and the worshipper responds, "I will sing to the Lord." This theme is repeated throughout the Psalms, where worshippers are called to sing. In Psalms 9 verse 11, it encourages us to sing praise to the Lord, and Psalms 33 verse 2 to 3 instructs us to sing with skill and joy, using stringed instruments and shouting for joy. The psalmist in Psalm 9 verse 2 says, "I will sing with joy because of you." In Psalm 59 verse 16, the psalmist sings about God's strength and constant love. Similarly, Psalm 71 verse 23 expresses how the psalmist will sing because of God has saved them. Psalms 89 verse 1, the psalmist promises to always sing of the Lord's constant love and proclaim His faithfulness forever. Singing was meant to be an ongoing act of praise. In Psalm 20, we see antiphonal singing. The king verses 6 to 8 and the congregation responds with verses 5. Then sings again, and the congregation responds with verse 9. Several psalms feature refrains like Hallelujah, which suggests a responsorial style of singing. This style could be practiced outside the temple, even without instruments. In conclusion, singing in worship was joyful, continual, and communal. Psalms show singing as a response to God's faithfulness, and we see both antiphonal and responsorial style used.
Good day, everyone. I am Liza McCullough, and today I will be talking about the two important ways of vocal expression, litanies and shouting. Both are widely used in different contexts, from religious ceremonies to public communication. So let's start with litanies. A litany is a form of prayer with a repetitive call and response style. It is commonly used in religious ceremonies where a leader recites a phrase and the congregation responds. Litanies are used for religious worship, meditation, and cultural traditions. For example, in Catholic practices, there is the Litany of the Saints. They have structured repetition, which helps in devotion and reflection. Shouting, on the other hand, is when we speak loudly, often to express strong emotions or communicative over a distance. It is used in different situations, such as expressing emotion like anger, excitement, or fear. It is also used in public gatherings, protests, and even sports. However, excessive shouting can sometimes be seen as aggressive and may also harm the vocal cords. Now, let's compare the two. While litanies are calm and structured, shouting is spontaneous and loud. Litanies are mostly used in religious and meditative settings, while shouting is often for urgent or emotional situation. To summarize, both litanies and shouting are important forms of expression, but they serve different purposes. Knowing when to use them appropriately helps us communicate effectively. And that ends my report.
Good day everyone, I am Frankeles Compasibo, and in this video, I am going to provide an overview of the topic entitled Feast and Festivals. The Jewish year was punctuated with great festivals celebrated in the temple. Some were timed to coincide with the changing seasons. Others commemorated great events in the life of Israel. All were occasions of wholehearted joy and thanksgiving for God's good gifts to His people, and at the same time, sober gatherings to seek His cleansing and forgiveness. And these are the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Second is the Feast of Weeks for harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering or Tabernacles, which will be discussed further by my groupmates. We have no biblical passages that give us information about music used at these festivals. Still, based upon the worship practices we have a record of, we can infer that these were joyous occasions accompanied by music. Thank you so much for watching and have a nice day everyone. Bye bye.
Good afternoon everyone, I'm Yasha Domagin, and today I'll be talking about or explaining Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, these two festivals were celebrated together and combined both pastoral and agricultural elements. The Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread are two closely related Jewish festivals that were celebrated together for a week. And when we say unleavened bread, it is any of a wide variety of breads which are prepared without using rising agents such as yeast or baking soda. Passover commemorates the Israelites' liberation from slavery in Egypt. The central event is the Seder, a ritual meal where families retell the story of the book Exodus and its symbolic foods like matzah or unleavened bread and marur or any kind of bitter herbs, while the Feast of Unleavened Bread focuses on the commandment to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. This is a reminder for the Israelites' hasty departure from Egypt, where they didn't have time for the bread to rise. Pastoral elements, the Passover lamb, which was sacrificed at the temple, was a key part of the festival. They connects to the tradition of animal sacrifice in ancient Israel and highlights the importance of livestock in the economy. While agricultural elements, the Feast of Unleavened Bread coincided with the barley harvest, marking the beginning of the agricultural year. This connection underscores the importance of agriculture in ancient Israelite society. While the exact date of their combination remains unclear, the two festivals were likely merged to create a unified celebration of both liberation and agricultural abundance. And that would be all. Thank you so much.
Feast of Weeks, which is harvest. This was held in the summer at the beginning of the wet harvest, which in theory followed 7 weeks after the cutting of the first stalks of barley. Later, this festival was known as Pentecost and was celebrated 50 days after the Passover. Originally, this was a celebration when the first fruits of the harvest were offered. Remember the giving of the law to Moses on Mount Sinai. In the Old Testament, we find detailed instruction for calculating this day. This was a day when the barley was out of the fields and the wheat was coming out of the fields. It was a time to come together with brethren and celebrate before Yahweh for the bountiful harvest he has given Israel.
Good day everyone. Today I will be presenting about the Feast of Ingathering, also known as the Feast of Tabernacles. This is a significant festival in Jewish tradition with deep historical and religious. The Feast of Ingathering is an 8-day autumn festival celebrated at the end of the fruit harvest. It is also called Festival of Tabernacles or the Feast of Shelters. Historically, this feast commemorates the 40-year period when the children of Israel were wandering in the desert, living in temporary shelters. After their exodus from Egypt, the Hebrew word for this festival is Sukkot, which means booth. The sukkah or shelter, a key element of this fest is the construction of a sukkah, which is a temporary shelter. The sukkah can be made from any material, but the roof must be made from organic material like branches or leaves and should be partially open to the sky. The interior of the sukkah can either be a plain or lavishly decorated depending on personal or cultural preferences. This shelter symbolized the temporary dwellings used by the Israelites during their journey in the wilderness. The Feast of Dedication. The Feast of Ingathering is also associated with another important event called the Feast of Dedication. This was also an 8-day festival dedicated to honoring God by around AD 70, and likely even earlier, this feast also came to commemorate the cleansing of temple and altar by Judas Maccabeus. This act of cleansing took place 3 years after the temple was defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes, a ruler who disrupted the holy temple. The Feast of Lights. Another notable aspect of the Feast of Dedication was the prominent use of lights. Because of this, the feast eventually gained the name the Feast of Lights. The lights symbolize purity, renewal, and divine presence, making it central of the celebration.